final lesson of the beginners series. And this one today, we're focusing on the finishing of songs and mixing, mastering, marketing, all sorts of different things. We'll kind of see where we go with this one based on the questions and what we want more attention with and that sort of thing. So at any point, just feel free to ask questions. But following on from last class when we looked at some overview of mixing and arrangement stuff, I want to sort of have a look at what are some checklists that we can do to give us a bit of confidence to know that our track is finished. And finishing a track, there's kind of two finished. There's the, is it ready to be played, finished? And then there's the, is it ready to be released, finished? And maybe somewhere in there as well is the, is it ready to be shown to labels, or is it ready for me to apply to labels with this music, finished? So we'll start off with the first finished, and that's, is it finished to be ready to play? So when we're thinking about playing a song, we really just, we're thinking about playing it within the context of DJing it, and we really just want to know, how is it going to hold up against whatever other songs we might play in our set, or however we're DJing it. And the question is how do we know how it actually holds up against another track? So, but first I want to look at kick and bass. So in your track, there's a few important things that I want you to look at. So as we spoke about in earlier sessions, we really want to be using a sidechain compressor on our bass so that our bass is ducking out of the way of the kick. And you can see this bass channel here that's actually been flattened. So we can see how each one of these bass hits has that sweep on it that shows that it has been sidechained already. But we can see one thing that this sidechain hasn't done is it's left a little bit on the end of each of these. And we can see that the kick here is overlapping with that little bit of extra bass. And when that happens, it's going to make a little bit of a woof, like a muddiness. So once you flatten it to audio, you do kind of want to go along here and just chop those off. And it's not as bad as doing that across the entire track generally, because you probably have like some smaller bass loop. So you just do that for how long the bass loop is and just repeat it along. If, however, in this song where you've got a whole lot of, I've got a whole lot of automation on this bass, I could also just as easily grab my utility and I'll go back to the very beginning of the track. And I'm just gonna have that gain. I'll zoom in here and go just before the kick and go down, because we don't want it to be a immediate chop off. Like if we had it like this, that's gonna make a pop. Well, you might have to just take my word for that one. But generally, if you ever have a volume automation that's a straight line, because the speaker kind of comes out and then you chop it off, the speaker has to go back to its neutral position. So it doesn't just go straight to silence. You usually get a little click or a pop. So in volume automation, we never want like perfectly straight lines. So I'm gonna just give it a little bit like that. And then, yeah. So the thing with sidechain is that, well, a shorter attack would do this, because this here is the this is the attack of the compressor. We can see like the compressor would be engaged here, but then it takes a little bit of time. If you had a super snappy compressor, yes, that would work. But sometimes if you put the attack that low, then it starts clicking.
How often do you see this? Like, is this on every track you do? Pretty much?
Pretty much, because even if the bass note say ends like here in the MIDI, like we kind of set up, so you make the MIDI a little bit shorter so that we kind of introduce this. Still, after like layers of processing and saturation and stuff, often you still have a little bit of a tail at the end.
That happening with the ducking?
Like with Shaperbox or something. Well, with Shaperbox, I generally add this little bit at the end. So in that case, then you wouldn't need to do this. But I wouldn't trust it until I bounce it to audio and like actually see that that's happened. Because otherwise, because like this channel had Shaperbox on it before it was flattened, and you'd think, oh, I've got Shaperbox on it, like no worries. But as you can see from this, it hasn't been perfect.
And in some cases, there may be actually some latency.
Yeah. With LFO tools like that, like Shaperbox or something that's on a loop, you can get latency, which messes it up. So
one quick question: when you flatten your track,
yeah.
do you how do you do that? Do you go into preferences and flatten the whole tracks, or do you just go select all channels, flatten, or do you individually flatten each track?
Usually I'll select multiple channels and then go freeze and flatten.
Just work your way through it.
I think this should be pretty quick because it's just volume automation, but maybe that's wishful thinking.
What's the difference between flatten and export bouncing as audio?
Well, for one, when you export as audio, you get to select the sample rate and bit rate that you're exporting it at. When you flatten it, I think it defaults to whatever the internal bit rate is, which on Ableton's generally 32-bit. So freeze and flatten, you usually get a higher quality than if you export it. Of course, you could export it at those high settings as well. But I just bring that up because one thing is that, say I'm like mastering 4 or 5 songs for playing it, and I do the mastering chain on all of them, it would be really nice if I can just select them all and flatten them. But then when you do that, if you just drag that audio out and put it in Record Box, it doesn't work on CDJs because the sample rate and bit rate's too high. So in that case, you do have to export it. But yeah, basically freezing and flattening is essentially the same as exporting at the highest settings.
Is there a recommended bit rate and sample rate when you export for mixing versus exporting for mastering?
Pretty much like, I think the standard now I would find is generally 24-bit 48 kilohertz. There is a benefit of going to 96 kilohertz if your computer can handle it, but I do most of my stuff still at 2448. It does seem like as bit rates are getting faster, hard drives are getting larger, all of that sort of stuff, we are seeing that creep up, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the future if it gets even higher. I think I spoke about it in one of the previous lessons, but the difference in quality that you would get from, say, going from 24 to 32-bit is far greater than increasing the sample rate from 48 to 96, because bit rate is calculated in 2 to the power of what bits you do. So if it's 24-bit, it's 2 to the power of 24, or 32, it's 2 to the power of 32. Whereas sample rate's just a number. So if it's like 48 to 96, it's just double as many samples. Whereas if you go up in bit rate, it's like thousands of times more.
But you stick to 24 purely
Pretty much. And also like 32-bit files are just massive as well. But saying that, yeah, I think, let me see what I've got it on here. You see, I'm recording in 24-bit here. But yeah, if you had that on 32-bit, then freezing and flattening and recording would be on 32-bit. And that's going to be significantly bigger file size, which is really all that limits it, I guess.
Yeah, and like you might work in 32, but at the end you'll be bouncing stereo to 24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also the other thing you have to think about with bit depth and sample rate and that sort of thing is that particularly bit depth, like how your computer uses RAM is when there's samples in the project, it loads the samples into the RAM while you're playing the audio so that they're like readily accessible. So if you have heaps of samples in your project, or if you freeze and flattened every single track to 32-bit, then 16 gig of RAM is probably not going to be enough to load all of those samples in so that it can play them on demand, and you'll start getting that disk overload error. Which like kind of happens up here. So yeah, at the moment I'm on 2448 is generally how I run everything. But yeah, once computers get better, I would hope that I can boost that up a bit. All right, cool. Now I can look in here and we've confirmed that now our bass is not overlapping with the front of the kick. And all of these basses look like they've been sidechained to the kick.
So is that going to help with your headroom as well?
Yeah, because it just means that there's less channels like overlapping, which means that you won't get the spike as much. The next thing that I want to check, so track mixing checklist, bass tails not overlapping with kick. I might have to restart Ableton at some point, but oh yeah, none of the plugins are showing up. The next thing, which we looked at a little bit last week in terms of mixing, is that I want to see where the sub frequencies of the bass are hitting. So what I can do is I'll solo the kick, and with this spectrum I can have this playing, and then on this scale I can actually turn that auto to range. And now what that's done is it has set the top level here as like, it set the loudest part of the kick as the top level. So now if I go ahead and solo the bass, we can very easily see how close that gets to where the kick was sitting. Whereas if I had this on auto, it will always basically set it like it'll set the maximum to wherever the top level is, and when I swap between the kick and the bass, it just looks like they're both at the top. So if we want to set the ceiling as the kick, click on that auto button, and then we can select our bass, and we want to look here, and particularly in these sub frequencies, we just want to make sure that this bass never goes above the kick, which we can actually see there, that it never goes above. This bit here gets kind of close, but in the sub frequencies, the bass never gets louder than the kick. That's going to ensure that when we play this song, that the kick has the most consistent driving force in it. And I feel like especially if you're looking at playing a track out, like to test it out or playing it in a club, that's going to be one thing that immediately makes your tune like not pump as hard as the other tracks you're playing, as if the sub is louder than the kick. So we want to make sure that that's not happening. Because we want it to go boom, 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 boom. We don't want it to be like boom, boom, boom. Because then it doesn't have the thump of the kick. And I'd probably turn this one down a little bit. Maybe just 1 decibel.
Seems to be stuck on 5% inside.
Yeah. What if I ever cancel that? Haha, there we go. Cool, here's our trusty span. So much nicer. Cool, so the next thing we want to look at is the overall balance. So remember last week we looked at how we want to make sure that there's the right distance between the sub of the kick and the highs of our hat. And then the mids are hitting sort of in the right level. So let me just jump into where there's a bit more stuff going on. And remember in the last session I said that this is very genre specific. So this is where it's important for you to get a track that is in the same genre as what you're writing, and you want to use that as a reference to figure out what the overall shape of your spectrum should look like. So quickly rehashing that. New tech. Do I have South Zone? Oh yeah, Lewis M's pretty good. Cool, so clearly this is a mastered track, so we're not going to be able to look at exactly what the numbers say about where the sub should be and where the highs should be, but we can still look at the overall shape. So I can look at the span here, and this is what I'm talking about as the overall shape. Very much noticing where the subs are hitting, where the highs are hitting, and what the shape of this mid-range is. If we know that we're matching the overall shape of the frequencies there, well, then we know that we're at least getting close to the similar mix balance that we're going for. So the next checklist will be check the mix balance with a reference. So now the next stage is kind of like, this is where I want to touch on a bit of basic mastering, because it's actually not until you start doing some basic mastering on your track that you often start to realize where things are going wrong with your mix. And this is where kind of going back and forth between mixing and mastering, just in a basic sense for the mastering, you will then see what needs fixing in your mix. Just give me one moment. I'm going to turn the light on. So we've talked a lot about balance. In the last 2 sessions, we talked quite a lot about the balance. And by balance, I mean what the track looks like in the frequency spectrum and span. But one thing we haven't spoken about yet is loudness. And loudness is an interesting concept because it's different than volume. Volume tells us volume is what this meter on the end of the track here tells you. So when I'm playing this song, if I look here, this meter here is telling me 14.8. That's what the volume is. That's the highest point of the volume is going to be metered here. And at the moment it's about negative 14.8. Now, if I listen to my track, well, on here it says it's negative 8. But that's a bit strange because that says negative 8. The Lewis M1 says negative 14, but the Lewis M1 sounds louder. So that means that this volume is not actually telling me how loud it sounds. It just tells me where the peaks are hitting. So this introduces this concept of loudness, which is actually different to the volume. So loudness is what's the average volume over time. Well, that's one way of thinking about it. And it's also another way of thinking about it is what happens if you add up all of these frequencies, because we can see that the peak volume is being triggered by the sub. But if we were to add up the volume of all of these frequencies, if we look at that there versus the Lewis M track, well, we can see the Lewis M track's quite a bit more full. So maybe that has something to do with why it actually sounds louder, is because it has a fuller frequency spectrum. So to actually know how loud something is you need some sort of loudness meter. Within Ableton, it's kind of, you don't have great loudness meters, I believe. For the sake of this workshop, I'm going to use FabFilter's loudness meter because it just shows it to us really clearly.
The Ulane one's free as well.
Which one?
Ulane. Had it up just a moment ago. Just type loudness. Yeah, that one.
Ah, yeah, cool. That's probably,
Yeah, everyone will be able to download that one.
yeah. That's probably why I've got this one here. So here it gives us some various different values of loudness, but generally LUFS is kind of the industry standard for loudness, and it's meant to be the most accurate to how you actually hear the loudness of it. So if we compare this, which is like -7, first of all, to compare loudness, both of the tracks have to have the same peak volume. So I'm going to align that here. So that's hitting around -10. So I'll put this up. -10. put this on the master. Actually,
So when you had that plugin on the reference track
yeah.
and the volume meter was 14,
Yeah, I just realized
move
that
that up and down.
doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just got a bit confused there because we want this on the reference track because when we start trying to master it on the master, we want this after the mastering chain. So we want to be finding out what's the loudness relative to 0. So this,
You don't have to set them the same.
no, we won't start off, we won't have them, well, yes, we will set them the same, but what we will be setting to them as the same is both at 0. So we can see that's like negative 8.5 lufs, which is quite loud, like probably more pushed than I would generally like it. And if I put this on the master here and I just grab a limiter, and I'm just using this limiter now to boost it up to 0. And I'll pull this down negative 10. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And I want this audio to just go straight to external out. So it's bypassing this limiter here. And if I listen to my track, we can see we're hitting around negative 11 lufs. So there we go. Now we've got a better idea as to why our track sounds significantly quieter than the other one, even if they're both peaking at the same point. It's because the lufs is different.
So the more lufs, the lower it is in loudness.
Well, yeah, because it's negative. So 0 lufs would be like kind of impossible, but that's like pure white noise. Would be pretty close to 0 lufs because every frequency is at the exact same volume. But different genres will have like a different point you aim for with lufs. So mastering checklist is match balance, match lufs. This is, if you can do both of these two things, so if you can match the overall EQ curve and you can match the loudness, your track will at least be able to hold up against that track in like a club setting where all that really matters is that there's enough sub and that it's loud enough and it's not just too quiet. However, the reason why mastering is such an art form and why people don't generally do their own mastering and why we pay, lots of money for people to master it is if you're trying to match the balance and match the lufs, especially this one, matching the loudness, how good it sounds as you boost it depends on how good of a mastering engineer you are. So you'll find that you might be able to match the lufs, but in doing so, you completely destroy the quality of your song, or you completely, it just doesn't sound like the same song anymore. So let's give that a sort of, let's give it a real rough approach and see kind of what the result is from that. So, all right, so we're trying to increase the loudness. And if we want to increase the loudness, we want to make sure that the quiet bits get louder and that we fill out the frequency spectrum a bit more. Well, the first thing is if we want the quiet bits to get louder, that's actually the same as bringing the loud bits down a bit. So I'm going to do that with some compression. And we'll use a real short attack and release for this. Pardon?
How much of gain staging do you do at the mixing level with mastering?
I usually try and have about 10 decibels of 10 dB of headroom in my mix. So usually the kick's hitting at around -10. And then at some certain points, maybe when all the sounds kind of are on top of each other, the master channel might be hitting at around -4 something at like crazy peaks. But generally I'm riding it at, my kick is sitting around that -10 point, so that we have quite a bit of headroom to do this. And I guess in the way that I'm sort of exploring this topic, we'll find that the earlier on in the process that you address issues, the cleaner mastering result you're going to get. So we'll start off by trying to solve all of our problems in mastering, but we'll find that it's actually going to illuminate to us which areas of our mix probably need help. So I'm going to give it a bit of compression. I'll put an EQ on here before that.
So you've got your makeup gain there at 4 dB.
Yeah. Oh, that was just sort of kind of put in there. I want probably like 2 decibels of gain reduction on this compressor, and then just giving it, yeah. So we'll do a bit of corrective EQ before here. So let's look at the balance of this track. So we can see the difference between our hats and the sub of our kick is, say, 1.5 of these blocks, and we've got some, and then our mids probably only drop to 1 block below the hats. So just as a loose guide. So now we'll look here, open our span, and we can see that, whoa, we can see that our subs a lot higher than our hats, and also in our mids, generally we could probably have a little bit more there, but I think what I'm going to correct here is just a little bit less subs. Ah, jeez. Alright, so this sort of balance is starting to look a fair bit more like the Lewis M1. And we can see that we're still getting a little bit of, yeah, we're still getting a bit of that compression. Now, what could be nice is before that compressor, we could do another compressor. But this one we're going to have just on 4, and we'll have the attack a little bit longer. So this one is going to be, this compressor, we're going to try and compress the more longer sounds that are too loud for a bit longer. And then, so that means that we can give it some gentle compression to the sounds that last a little bit of like more than, 10 milliseconds. And then the next compressor is really sharp and quite hard, and that's going to catch some of those peaks. So we get maybe something like that. Okay, so we're getting some EQ correction to help balance out the overall balance. We're using some compressors to gently bring down some of the peaks that are too loud. Now we want to have a multi-band compressor, which we'll use multi-band dynamics for. And I'm going to put this before the glue compressors, because these compressors are being triggered by any frequency that gets too loud, but we don't necessarily want to turn down the entire track if any frequency gets too loud. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down to, say, a ratio of about 6. And I'm going to bring this down until we see a couple decibels of gain reduction there. Nothing too crazy. So we've got a multi-band compressor that's catching any particular frequencies that are too loud. And then we've got 2 compressors that are also doing a bit of gain reduction. And then at the end here, we've got the limiter, which is the final stage where if something is still too loud, then it's just going to be brick walled. So just after doing some subtle multi-band compression, a little bit of EQ correction, and some compressors, now let's see how loud we can make it. So I'm going to just turn up the input gain to the limiter. Until I can see we can see that even after all this, I'm still kind of struggling to get it much above 10. Let's go to somewhere. But one thing I'm noticing is, so I'm pushing this limiter, I'm giving it that 10 decibels, but I'm seeing a lot of stuff hitting that limiter. And what I can do is I can go through my track and just start to mute things to see what's causing that. So if I mute my snare, for example, which I think is a major culprit in this song, so we see the kick's like not really hitting up there at all. So if I push the kick a bunch, See, that's kind of a nice level for the kick. It's only a tiny bit of limiting. But when I put those drums in there, okay. So like, that's telling me that in particular the snare is hitting like too hard on the kick, and that's causing it to peak. So if that was happening, and it usually is a problem, then what you'd want to do is come down and have a look at the snare. And you can see on this snare we've already done this, but you see how this snare is actually not hitting directly on the kick. And in fact, the bit that hits directly on the kick is kind of a bit quieter than the rest of it. Like that bit where the click of the kick comes through is actually kind of a bit quieter. So we've got snare a little bit before the kick and snare a little bit after the kick. Having it like that, so having like actually the snare sort of spread around the kick instead of being right on the kick, is one way that you can, that when the kick and the snare hit together, you don't get as extreme volume spikes. In this case, it wasn't enough. Another thing, if you see that the snare and the kick is what's smashing into that limiter, is you can grab an EQ8, and we just like really want to ensure that the drums don't have much low end in them. So let's have a look to see if maybe that's the case in this track. And you see here, there's some of these extra low frequencies that are coming through in the drums. So putting a low cut on there, doesn't really make any difference to the drum group, but all of this extra stuff underneath here, that's going to be adding to the kick and meaning that we get less headroom. Alright, so we've done a fair bit of compression. I don't think it's sounding super smashed, so I might bring this down a bit more. How's it sounding there? Is it still is it sounding heaps compressed, or do you reckon go more? So I'll look at this span again. Alright, I can see that around this 200 Hertz zone, we're getting quite a lot of frequency build up. And sometimes that's getting pretty close to those sub frequencies. So in our EQ, I'll go in here and around 200 Hertz, just scoop some of that out. As you can see, we're with all of these little changes we're making, because we've got this limiter at the end, we're not actually, the volume is not increasing at all. Like the peak volume is still just going to be 0 or negative 0.3 decibels here. But we are increasing the overall loudness. So we're filling up it more and more. But there's one other way of increasing loudness of a sound, and that's through saturation. So at the moment, we've just used dynamics controls like compressors, and we've used some EQ here. But also saturating it will add to the overall loudness. Yeah. Well, it depends on what kind of saturation you do, and this is where kind of like I'm giving a general approach with the Ableton tools, but I would also really like in this session to talk about sort of some VSTs that I feel like actually are important. And I think that there's some VSTs that have features that Ableton things just can't do, but there's not that many. In general, Ableton can kind of do everything, but what you get from VSTs is every VST or every audio effect you use in general has its unique character. Like it has a particular sound that it has. And some VSTs just have a particular sound that you might really prefer or you might like more. And when it comes to mastering, because everything that we're doing is so subtle, that's where the particular sound of VSTs comes in a lot. Like, you could have a limiter, and if you're just using a limiter on a single channel, you could use the Ableton limiter, or you could use a $1,000 limiter. And once you've got the entire song, it's going to be hard to know which limiter you used on that one channel. But when it comes to mastering, because the whole track is going through the limiter, and any distortion that's applied by that limiter will be applied across the whole channel, the whole track, then the unique quality or the unique tone of a VST really starts to come in, and that's when it really starts to matter. And one interesting thing about plugins and stuff. So if we look at just the Ableton's EQ3, I've got that. So this is just an EQ, right? Like it shouldn't do anything when it's just in this position. But if I look at my loudness, I'll go to that snare section. All right, it's about -10.5 with the EQ3 turned off. If I just turn this EQ3 on with none of the settings engaged, we can see that, of course now
They fixed it.
Maybe actually. Oh, well, there's one way to check that, because I know for sure.
Like when I was writing tunes a few years ago, exactly the same thing.
When you.
That's the process of putting something on it.
Oh, nah, look. You can see it's changing something. Whoa. How do I? want this to go. Nah, because I want to be able to crank it. Yeah, so, all right, so we can see here that that's hitting right on 0. And when I turn this on, it's starting to peak a little bit above 0. See, now it's going to -2. Whereas having it off, it's hitting at 0. Turn it on, suddenly it gives it peaks. Even though it's doing nothing, or it's meant to be doing nothing, it's actually adding some volume there that ends up making it spike, which is really annoying because if you're DJing with Ableton, you would naturally go to use the EQ3 to DJ with because you got low, mids and highs, and you'd be DJing mastered music. So you would want it to be at 0. And then as soon as you just put that EQ3 on your mastered music, suddenly you're redlining, even without doing anything. And then if you give it a little tweak either way, then then it's just going ridiculous. All right, well, yeah, I thought that, I was like, oh my God, they've actually fixed that, but it's just not registering in the loudness, but it does increase the peak. But basically the reason I show that is because that just shows that using an audio effect, even if it's not doing anything, is still affecting the audio itself. And that therefore, pretty much most mastering chains are going to be EQ to do some corrective EQ, multiband compression to catch any problem frequencies and control the frequency bands, and then compression and limiting. Now we'll probably also have saturation in there at some point. But as I just showed with the EQ3, the plugins themselves add some saturation. So which plugins you choose to use here will ultimately color the master. And this is where, analog mastering comes into it. Like even if it's an analog compressor and it's meant to just be doing compression, that electronic circuit will also add some distortion, and that distortion could be very pleasurable saturation that that actually does add to it. So we could add some saturation in here. And I'm putting this after the compression because I would prefer to saturate the frequencies that we want. And I could add a little bit of I could maybe reduce the amount of saturation on the lows and add something a bit like this. Whoa. The mids and highs, yeah. It'd be great if I could just completely, this is kind of showing one limitation of Ableton's saturator here, is that we don't have truly multi-band saturation. And as far as I know, maybe with Raw they have some true multi-band. This is new just to 12. Maybe you could add a high pass. Yeah, but that's actually gonna high pass the output. Expander. Oh yeah, yep, that could help a lot, although, so compression reduces the dynamic range and expansion increases the dynamic range. So have you seen that used in mastering? or in other sound design techniques?
Sometimes if the dynamics are too much,
Yeah.
enough the compression it doesn't bring. Sometimes we take time to just lift the lower levels a little high.
Yep. Yeah, like that's not in my mastering chain, although I'm not a mastering engineer, so I don't, I feel like that could work really well. Oh, here we go, multiband. Ah, sweet. All right, so in this case, let's turn this lows amount down, delete this saturator, give it a little bit of mids. And highs. And
is that saturator in Ableton default or is it?
this raw?
Yes.
Yeah, that's in Ableton 12.
12.1.
12. No, raw's 12, I think. Or is it 12.1?
No, I don't know.
But yeah, I'll show you the Fab Filter chain that I use in a minute. But I want to try and at least replicate it here first. Yeah, that's... Oh, I can just turn that off. Oh, it's the filter. Turn that off. Alright, so giving it some saturation. How are we going now? Alright, now we're like well into the loudness range. Okay, so we can see that that bit of extra saturation, or not bit, but heaps of extra saturation.
That saturation that you just put on now.
Yeah.
Is that like it doesn't sound to me like it's added heaps of harmonics. It's definitely gotten louder.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it hasn't wrecked the mix in my opinion.
Mm.
Which often a saturator will do.
Yeah, I was expecting it, and obviously I can't hear it as good from here. I was expecting it to mess it up way more. Actually, I'm pretty impressed with that.
How much extra output have you put onto it?
Oh yeah, quite a bit in terms of loudness. Like if we turn that off, so -10. Yeah. Yeah, so 4.8% on mids and 5% on highs. And we got a whole extra luff there.
Low is off, is it?
Low is off, yeah. Definitely. And then the last sort of thing that we do here before the limiter is I'm going to grab another EQ. And this one is to do a bit of mid-side. So we're split. So if I go to this mode here and go MS, then I have two different EQ curves, one for mid and one for side. And we want to just increase the width. So I'm going to just grab these highs and just increase the volume of the side information. And typically a good rule of thumb when you're looking at like how wide your mix should be is you kind of want it like a tree where the bass is mono, and then as you go up in higher frequencies, the mix gets wider and wider. And generally when you're working on a track, you'll find that a lot of the loud stuff is in the middle channel, and the stuff on the sides is a bit quieter. So what that means is that, remember, what we're working with the limiter is the peak volume, and we're trying to increase the volume of the quiet bits of our mix. And we've been looking at that in this EQ. We were looking at, let's bring up, bring up the highs and the mids. We did that by bringing the lows down. But we've been thinking about it very much in a frequency spectrum range. Same when we're looking at the balance here. But the missing part was, we not only do we have the frequency spectrum from lows to highs, but we also have mids and sides. And if our sides are quiet, we can boost those sides up quite a bit without boosting the mids, and it's not going to increase the overall volume, but it will increase the loudness, because whenever we're making quiet parts louder, we're increasing the loudness. Doesn't seem to be doing anything, eh? Alright, so one thing I noticed there is that, like, it sounded like it was a lot louder before the drop, and then when it dropped, it was a bit like lackluster, which makes me think that it's probably a bit too compressed.
There's also a lot more gain reduction in upper part of the breakdown on the drop.
Yeah. but we're thank you. But we were able to achieve the overall balance and overall loudness of the reference track. Maybe a little bit less. But at some cost of like cleanness and audio quality. And I guess that sort of suggests where the sort of mastery of mastering comes in, which is how can we do these steps in a way that maintains the most clarity while still achieving the desired loudness we want. But in terms of just, making a song ready to play, if we're able to match this loudness and the frequency balance, and it doesn't sound like super distorted, you're probably going to be able to play it in a set, and it's not like, maybe it'll sound a little bit less high quality, but it's not going to be like way too quiet or way too weak or anything like that. Like, the two indicators to compare your track to someone else's is the balance and the loudness, and then also, I guess, the stereo width as well, which is why we boosted this a bit here.
The reduction that's happening on the limiter,
Yeah.
being around 5 and
Yeah.
at tops, would that be a bit too much?
Like when I'm mastering stuff, it just depends. Like if it's only happening on like claps, then maybe that's okay. But if that kind of brings it into the next point, which is now what's really helpful is by doing like a rough master, is we can watch our track and see what smashes into that limiter, and then you can decide, then you can go back into the project and find those things that are hitting the limiter and work on them and turn them down or get them in balance.
So you're just soloing through.
Yeah, so like, you see like a big spike there, and then you might turn off a group. It's like, oh, okay, so that didn't make it go away. Maybe I'll turn the leads off. Right. And you're like, oh, okay, I think that's in the leads group. And then you just narrow it in, turning stuff off until you don't see that spike anymore. That can be a really good way of finding out, what in the mix is going to cause the mastering engineer problems. And ultimately, the less basic issues you cause the mastering engineer, the better your master is going to come out. And so just setting up like some sort of subtle, some sort of rudimentary mastering chain can really just help you work on your mix, because, we're not going for like a professional master on this track, but setting it up roughly like this means that now our limiter is really going to show us what is causing issues in our mix, and we can go back and try and fix those. Now, just a note, like, I generally like my music to sit around -10 to -9.5. So we looked at this Lewis M track, and I think it was like -8.5. That's quite loud, and you will lose dynamics if you go any higher than -10. And I feel like you're starting to notice a significant change in dynamics, but it just depends on the style. Like a lot of like full-on psytrance might be at like -7.5 or something like that. And like drum and bass I've seen go as high as like -5, like genre specific, like, but big, crazy loud EDM, like when they talk about like, you know, loudness wars and stuff like that, like it can get pretty crazy loud.
Is there a loss that Spotify sets its music to?
Yeah, it's 11.
Yeah.
So if you come in at 9.5,
They're just gonna bring it to
they're just going to punch it up.
Down.
Sorry. Yeah.
But yeah, they'll balance it out. But then again, like,
Which is, well, I guess down is better than up.
yeah, I guess so. Or no, I would say up is better than down because then you'll get more dynamics.
Oh, sorry, it's reversed.
But yeah, that's a good question. I think like
You don't really have to worry about it.
I just don't really care about Spotify that much, I guess. Like I'm mainly just
You can't hear it audible, you know, it's not like it's reducing the volume
yeah.
to really matter.
Yeah.
You just want to make sure your beatport, you know, is on point, I guess.
What's Beatport set at?
It'll be whatever you send them.
I would say it's whatever you send it. And that's where I'm concerned about LUFS is in DJing, because if you have the trims set at the same, like say you have the trims both at 12 and you play, you know, someone who I think has really beautiful dynamic music, like Electric Nose, a lot of his tracks are like -11 or like pretty low in LUFS, because that's why his music has all this breathing room and sounds really dynamic. But if you were DJing and you're like, oh, I'm going to mix this Lewis M track into this Electric Nose track, the Electric Nose track's going to come in at like 3 decibels quieter in LUFS, and it's just not going to hit the same. Like, you know, maybe if you went Electric Nose into Lewis M, then it's like going to be like, whoa. But either way, like when you're DJing, you want to try and maintain like a similar loudness level, because otherwise, yeah, that, you know, we've all heard someone bring in a track and it's like heaps louder than the one previously, and it's like, oh, what? Like, to keep the journey smooth, we're trying to maintain that loudness. And that's sort of where when it comes to like mastering your own tunes, you want it to be at least close to what the genre standards are, so that other DJs, because, you know, if a DJ mixes one of your tunes and it's like way quieter than everything else they've been playing, they probably just won't do that again. You know, it won't get a good reaction, and then they just won't play it again. So you want it to be close enough, but then you also don't want to like get caught up in the loudness war too much and try and like sound louder and fatter than everybody else. But, you know, within plus or minus 1 decibel, I feel like is not too much of a big difference. Do I have?
The pioneer DJ mixers don't do auto gain.
Nah.
People don't do it when they DJ though. I swear they just stick the gain knobs at the same level and just fucking play track after track.
Yeah, and that's that. And a good DJ will listen to it while they're queuing it and adjust the gain accordingly.
Do you gain much of your ears DJing or
Usually, well, for sure is when I first load it, I'll have all of the EQs on 12, and I'll just skip into the middle of the song and press play and just have a look at the lights, just to see that if they're like at least at the same point as the song before it. And then from there just go by ear in terms of EQ and trim and that sort of stuff. But sometimes I get caught up in the moment and forget to do that properly as well.
I used to, I've got to do better at it recently. Because I had some bombs we played out and I put one in that's so weak it's a huge drop from mix, so I'm like, fuck, that did not slap.
Oh, Alex Perez, that should be pretty bloody loud. Oh, like look at that waveform. You can already see. Like -8. But like you can hear how squished it sounds. Like, pardon? Do I have a Merkaba track? Yeah, probably. I don't know if I'd have something in WAV, but that shouldn't really matter for this sort of referencing. Might only have like really old stuff. Yeah. Nothing nothing that would flex his mixing ability.
Have you tried one of the as a Sky ones?
Oh yeah. Yeah, deep water.
It's not a loudness meter enough if you want to make sure it has a same level across multiple devices. When you're going from studio monitors to club versus headphones.
So that is going to come down more to the balance of the track, how well your track translates from one sound system to another is going to come down more to the balance, so the frequency spectrum and how wide it is. The loudness is going to be more about how it compares between one track to another track on the same sound system. Because like if all of your tracks are at -12 and super dynamic, but your entire set's like that, then it's just then you can just turn the volume up and it's just gonna sound nice, like more open and dynamic. It's when when there's a difference in loudness from song to song that you really notice a difference. But the balance, like the frequency spectrum, if that's not nice and balanced, then what you usually find is that like if you're not looking at spectrums, most likely you'll make your mix to sound really nice in your room. But the problem is, do I still have SonarWorks on here? Or some... The problem is that most rooms have a very extreme EQ curve on them. Yep, sweet. So this should give you, remind me later, skip guide. Oh, no, it's not loaded anymore. I'll just get like a generic one. So like something like this, believe it or not, is actually pretty. That's actually if your bedroom looked like that, that would not be that bad. Like the blue one, yeah. Because at least you're not getting any significant boostage. But a lot of the time in like rooms that are say 3 by 4 meters or typical bedroom size, you'll get quite an extreme constructive interference node, aka there'll be some frequency that will resonate in that room and get boosted, and there'll be also another region at around 100 hertz that will get cut. Like 12 decibels is probably pretty extreme, but even in my room with like bass traps, carpet, like a queen size bed in there, I'm pretty sure that the cut is still like 8 decibels, and like this boost node hits like 6 or 7 decibels as well. So what this tells me is that if your ears are going for flat in a bedroom, to make it actually sound flat, you have to correct for these nodes. So so in your bedroom you cut a bunch of these low mids out, otherwise it sounds real. You cut all of these low mids out, otherwise it sounds really boomy. Well, when you listen to it outdoors, that EQ is not applied anymore. So suddenly your mix might sound really hollow. Or
so that EQ goes between your sound card and you.
yeah, so yeah. Sound leaving the speakers, by the time it reaches your ear, it has this EQ applied to it.
But once you take your music out of the studio,
Yeah,
that no longer applies.
yeah,
So theoretically, whatever you've mixed down in your studio
yeah.
should sound okay outside.
Oh, if you're using SonarWorks. Yes, exactly. That's why SonarWorks or Dirac is so important, because it applies that EQ and corrects for the room. So you're not making decisions based on your room anymore. And one thing you hear all the time with sort of bedroom producers has to do with this bit here, because naturally in their room that area is scooped, they end up boosting that 80 to 100 hertz region more, because in their room it sounds really hollow. So you boost that, and then guess what? In the car, it's nearly the opposite. So that's boosted. So then you go into your car and it sounds like heaps boomy, and you're like, what the hell? Like, it sounded super tight in my room, and then in my car it sounds really boomy. And that can be explained by that bit there where, because the car's way smaller, this frequency curve depends entirely on the dimensions of the room that you're in. Depending on what the dimensions of the room are, we're going to get a different frequency curve.
One more question about that.
Yeah.
So when you've got that running,
Yeah.
has it got an on-off button?
Yeah, it does. And it's got a dry wet as well. And I usually have it at like 70% or something, like not 100%, just because the 100% can sound a bit unnatural, like because you're used to hearing music in a room get affected by the room. And if you completely remove that, sometimes it actually doesn't sound right either. And it's why like people who have pro studios, even though no pro studio would ever be completely flat, they won't do extra room correction, because they'll just learn to like the curve of the room and know what that room curve is like.
Yeah. What's that worth?
I think it's like probably around like 450 or something like that. I actually now, I don't use SonarWorks anymore. I use Dirac, which doesn't look like any of these, but Dirac is just a different brand. Dirac is a French, I think originally it was for like home theaters and stuff, or like big theaters and theaters and stuff like that, and like professional. It's very pro audio, but they actually brought out like a bedroom correction tool like SonarWorks, and it just seems to sound a little bit more natural than SonarWorks. Like SonarWorks gets it sounding really tight, but it definitely sounds like there's a serious EQ on there, where Dirac does it in some way that's a bit smoother. And I think SonarWorks, like, their whole business model is around marketing to bedroom producers. And they were the first ones to do it. And it just seems like everyone only knows that SonarWorks is the only one. Whereas Dirac brought that product in a lot later, and so people don't really know about it as much. But my friend Gosha, who's like total audiophile and has a really, really nice studio, we compared them side by side, and Dirac sounded better. Like, it sounded more natural than SonarWorks. So I swapped across to that.
Come with microphones, or do you use your own microphone?
I think both of them have options that they can come with microphones, like packages or something. But because you only really need the mic once, I've always just like posted in like producer group chats and stuff like that, and just be like, anyone got a mic I can borrow for a day? And like,
What, any mic?
no, but there's like these specific ones,
That's what I meant. Yeah.
but like a bunch of people have bought them. Like I own the Dirac one, but I don't own the SonarWorks one. But most people buy them and they just sit in a drawer. So like people are usually pretty okay with you borrowing it for a couple of days to go do your sound correction.
Do you get like one license with the software, or do you need to
You get two, I think. So I've
share with a mate?
yeah, pretty much. So yeah, that's kind of to go to your question, Ash, about how how you get it to sound good across multiple sound systems is by making sure that your span, the balance, the frequency balance of your track matches that of pro audio. Songs that, like, I spoke about this briefly last lesson, but it's good to start collecting reference tracks in a folder. And these are tracks that you've just consistently listened to on all sorts of sound systems. And you go, that track, no matter where I listen to it, sounds amazing. And that's what you want to use as your reference track to figure out what loudness and what balance you should go for.
Mixing. I did basic mixing in using my headphones. And then I push the Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is it sounds more often, so I thought maybe some issue with spatial thing and soundstage.
Yeah.
Could be due to mastering, but I did use Landa mastering.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought maybe that was good enough.
Well, yeah, I guess it's all, like, everything contributes some to it. Like, it's all a lot of 1%ers. Like, definitely if the track's not wide enough spatially, that can make it sound quite boxed in. But also if the...
And to be honest, that's only the car. And my headphones is still okay.
Okay, does it sound wide in your headphones, or...
It sounds normal, wet, supposed to be. Not too wide.
Yeah.
It just sounds but when I listen to the car, it sounds more boxed in.
Yeah.
I don't reckon you trust the car. I hate my car.
Yeah.
Sounds like shit.
Yeah, my car sounds terrible. I
But
put
you can
tunes in
compare
there
it against songs that sound great.
Yeah, exactly. You can compare it to, whoever your favorite producer is.
It's the ones that you know and trust.
And if you know that sounds good in your car, then it's not your car's fault.
I don't know. Even the ones I like in my car don't do it justice.
No? All right. Well, that's a good sign that you're,
Car speakers are shit.
don't.
You just lose all these sounds that you can't
Especially in
hear.
the bass end, I find the cleanliness gets so grody for me.
Yeah.
You can't even EQ in the car anymore.
Well, it's not EQ, but I've tried several times and I just can't get it right.
I've done that. I think it helped a bit going to the low end out, which probably makes sense there based on what you're saying about boosting those frequencies just sub 100.
This is going to be a tougher frequency curve to find. If I start searching car audio frequency response, it's gonna be showing me what the speakers are putting out, not actually what you're hearing. But I can assure you that the peak and the trough sort of shape that we saw down at 100 hertz in your room will be moving up around that 200 hertz range, or even a bit higher, which is that kind of, yeah. All right. So we looked at basic sort of mastering chain of doing some corrective EQ, multiband dynamics to catch the peaks, a bit of compression, some saturation of sorts, and then make it wider into the limiter. Now, if I just delete all that. And drop in what I would actually use for mastering for playing, you'll see that it's much the same. We'll see how many of these plugins want to load. That'll be interesting. Oh, Jesus. just waiting for it to be like.
Do you have the plugin windows open automatic on purpose, or?
Nah, it's just because it's just like when you drag in a plugin, I want it to open straight away. But because I dragged in a whole rack, they've all decided to open at one. Or, yeah, they're all opening at once. All right. So that was a bit scary when that all opened, but I'll show you how this is kind of the same. But I want to actually, show you this to show you kind of honestly what I'm using. So this is the first stage of the EQ. So this is where if the whole track might need some highs, I might boost that, or might, duck some mids or something like this. So basically, again, it's just an EQ. But this Pulsar W495, some of these are free, but it just adds, it's just a bit of like an analog emulation. So yes, it's doing some EQ, but it's doing some subtle saturation as well. The next is just a compressor, which I usually have this doing about 2 decibels or so. The next one, which is the unknown one, that's the multiband compressor there. And then here is a saturator. But what's really cool about this Vertigo is that each one of these saturation bays has the option to just saturate the mids or just saturate the sides. So you can like just saturate sides. So this is a way of getting more width by adding more saturation just to the side frequencies. Then this Poitec EQ is just another subtle EQ, but this is what I would use around the kick and the low end. If the kick is a bit too boomy, this can help tighten it up a little bit. And then this multiband compressor, linear phase, it's just a Waves multiband compressor. This one is what's really controlling the frequency bands. And then I've got a limiter here. So it's very similar, but you can see that there's no like multiband saturator in here. Like when before we used raw, which was that like the Ableton saturator, and we had that saturating the mids and the highs. I don't really have that in this chain, but that's because all of these plugins are emulating analog. They all add their own particular bit of saturation anyway. So I find that you probably don't need an actual saturator on top of that. Although Vertigo can, if I can put that on the mids. And then after that, these are some kind of really cool like AI tools which really can make it quite interesting. So Smart Limit is a limiter, but you can set what you want the desired LUFS to be. All right. Yeah, it's not going to have much fun with all the recording software and stuff. Smart Limit, one good one to check out. You basically just put in your desired negative 9.5 LUFS and it auto adds the gain to try and match that. And then True Level and True Balance. These are really good tools for analyzing your master or just your mix in general. And you could also, so this basically shows you the EQ curve and this shows you the loudness. So this is basically just a loudness meter like we were using Ulean for. And True Balance is basically just a spectrum analyzer. However, you can load in reference tracks here. So we could actually see the our spectrum side by side with the one we were looking at. And that's just like, what was it called? Multi-AB, or what was metric AB? Very similar to true balance. I got the limiter there. So that's I don't use that mastering chain to master other people's music, because you could see on there that there wasn't really much correction. But that's just for mastering my own music, because if I know that I have access to the whole mix, I'm gonna try not to do any real serious EQing or anything like that in the master, because I'm just gonna fix that in the project. And on the master, I just want something to like boost up the loudness and compress it a bit.
But you always flatten before you do that?
Yeah, well, I would never master it in the project like this. Like, unless I can. But most of the time, as you saw with that...
Sorry, do you do it in stereo and then go back into the...
Yeah. Like, if my computer can handle putting that... Like, as you saw, I put that mastering chain on, press play, and it shit itself. Because it's... The thing with, like, analog plugins is they use heaps more CPU because they're actually processing a lot more. So often it's... Yeah, I'll probably make notes or something like that. Or I would bounce just these out as stems. So I'd have like maybe eight stems, and then I can still correct it a little bit. But yeah, basically, if you're going for mastering just so you can play a track, try and match the balance and try and match the loudness as close as you can, and then export the track and then reference it. So export, reference, and I will say at least 3 one headphone, 1 speaker, and like 1 monitor. So like, you know, you have your studio and then a pair of headphones and then some other sort of speaker like UE boom, or like your car stereo, or like your lounge room stereo, or something like that. And what a bad master sounds like is, first of all, like actual distortion. Like every time the kick hits, it goes like, can't make the sound, but you know, like the distorted kick sound. Like if we just, if you smash the crap out of it, it'll sound distorted. And that's usually the trade-off for getting loudness. So we want to make sure, and what I find actually is that often if I master it on my monitors, for some reason I can't hear a bad master on my monitors as well as I can hear it on headphones. Like on headphones, I can hear the destruction of a bad master more than on my speakers. But I don't really like mastering on my headphones that much. Like it's just this weird thing, but because it's so subtle, like it's not better to master on headphones or better to master on monitors. It's just better. You just want to listen to it on all of those before you play it in a club or something like that. So if your balance is matched, you're pretty close to the LUFS, let's say plus or minus 1 decibel. You've exported it, and I'll say max 24-bit 48 kilohertz so that it works on CDJs. And then you listen to it on headphones, a speaker, and your monitors.
What dither setting?
I would say triangular dither.
What's your reason for choosing that mode?
Mr. Bill said so.
We'll do it then.
Yeah. And then once you get there and you are still happy with how it sounds, I would say it's safe to play it on a rig in clubs or whatever and test it out. And you can be fairly confident that when you press play and it starts coming out, you're not going to be surprised. Because that's really all we're trying to do with mixing, is we just want it to sound the same on every sound system. Like pre-mixing or pre-mastering, we've been trying to make it sound good on our headphones or on our speakers. At the end of mastering, the goal is that it sounds good on every sound system. That's kind of the point of mastering. But if you can do these things in reference to a reference track, you can be fairly confident that you're not going to be too surprised when you play it through a sound system. I'm not going to guarantee you that it's going to sound amazing, and I'm definitely not going to guarantee you that someone will pay you for this service to be a mastering engineer. But if you can get this, then you at least know that it's safe to play it out. And that's kind of where, at least for me, that's as far as my mastering expertise goes. Is I've got a new song and I want to play it this weekend in my set. How can I be confident that this song's never been played through a loud sound system before? How can I be confident that it's not gonna blow the speakers, blow people's eardrums, or sound shit? And like, that's my checklist basically. Mixing checklist is pretty similar as well. Like if you have actually used a reference track, you can remove this loudness. So loudness is not so important when it comes to your mixing. So we've got bass tails not overlapping, checks mix balance with a reference. Definitely want to be doing one headphone, one speaker, like comparing that. Now, for a pre-master, we actually don't want that dither setting on there. Do you guys know what dither is? Yeah, it basically is noise. Where that option comes up is when we go to export, it says down here, dither options. And I generally have that set to no dither. But when at some point, that dither needs to be added. And that's because what we actually have is, so, we've got our waveform, but what that waveform actually is just a series of points. Yeah. And how frequently these samples get played, that is our sample rate, SR. So how many of these points get played every second is our sample rate. So if we have it on 48,000, means we hear 48,000 of these samples per second. And the resolution of this height is our bit depth. Now, what happens is there's here to here, and what it actually does is like this. So what we end up with is all of these jagged bits, which actually adds to distortion. So we want to smooth these sections out a bit, and we can actually do that by just like adding a bit of noise in here. And believe it or not, adding that little bit of noise actually makes it sound way more natural than if we had have just left it jagged. And this noise is called dithering. So at some point we definitely want to add that. But the reason why we don't want to keep adding it is because you could imagine that, say I dither on the pre-master and I add this noise for the pre-master, then I send it to the mastering engineer, well then they dither it again. And like, or if I dithered it on my stems and then if I just have the dither setting constantly set to, have it constantly dithering, you end up getting multiple layers of that, which it's probably a 0.01% thing, like in terms of being able to notice it. But best practice is to only dither it when you're mastering the track. And if everyone sticks by that rule, then it doesn't start stacking up. And I've heard, and like professional mastering engineers won't dither here either. They'll have VSTs designed for really nice dithering. So that's another reason why maybe you don't want to dither it on Ableton when you send a pre-master off, because the mastering engineer will add that too. Cool. Well, we're pretty much out of time. We focused a lot on the mastering stuff, which I think that's all good. But I kind of wanted to have a bit of a discussion about sending music to labels and stuff like that. I feel like that's the other part of finishing songs, you know. Obviously writing songs and being able to play them ourselves is great, and being able to share them, maybe upload them to SoundCloud or whatever. But when we send music to labels, like knowing if it's ready to be sent, this checklist works for that too. But I think just a few things on that is I think that it is positive to send music to labels and send it to them as much as possible and not really get concerned about being rejected. But also knowing that, at least from my experience in underground music, people who run labels really heavily like identify with the sound and aesthetic and their curation of the label. And most of the time, it's not, they're not as much concerned about helping or platforming new and unique music as much as they are about creating their aesthetic, which their aesthetic might include new and unique music for sure, but it is still very much subjective as to what they're looking for at that particular time and whether or not that fits what they want. So, you know, I've sent music to labels and been consistently rejected for a long time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that my music is not ready to be released on labels. It just means that it means that the labels it's not what they were looking for, I guess. And the sooner you can just become comfortable with sharing music or sending music to labels and get rejected, I think that that's like a good thing to overcome and not be too concerned and really just not take it that personally. Like, the best thing you can do is if they give you feedback as to why they don't want it, that might be really helpful. And, you know, if it's a technical thing, like you need to work on mixing or something like that, then that's actually really, like, you've just gotten free feedback. Like, it's positive to get a rejection with feedback. And even if they just say, nah, not for us, or if you never hear anything back, just move on, keep writing music. And if you get a song and you send it to, you know, a dozen labels and none of them take it, don't not release it. Like, I would still just put it on SoundCloud at the very least. Like, if you're finished with it, your goal should just be to at least have it somewhere public, like before you move on, and then, you know, it just ends up gathering dust somewhere. Because having that somewhere where people can see it, it's important for you to make your, like, to be vulnerable like that and put yourself out there and give other people that opportunity to listen to it and to judge you. Because once it's somewhere public, when you start listening to it, and it's just like in previous lessons how I've said, like, even just getting someone into the room to listen to the song when you're sitting next to it, you hear the song differently now. And when I listen to songs that I have on Spotify, I will hear things in there that I never heard before I released it, because now it's public and it's going to be there forever. And I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't do that, you know? But having that cringe feeling is a really powerful motivator to not do it again. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly how I felt. As soon as it got released, it was like, how did I miss that?
Yeah.
Is it a good idea to use distribution platforms?
Yes. I think most labels use distribution platforms. And if you wanted to release something not through a label, I would recommend using a distribution platform. I think it seems like Proton is like starting to be, is a really good platform for that. Over the years, I've seen different labels use lots of different ones, but more recently, it seems like Proton is kind of like all of the labels are moving across, and even like labels that I work quite closely with that resisted it for a while have given in and decided to move across to it. They just have really, like, their fees are really good. They make royalties super easy, and like they do a lot of stuff like that. So yeah, Proton's really good. And then it just means you upload your music to one place, and then it goes everywhere onto every platform. And then you only have to go to one place to get your royalties as well. So it's probably worth doing. And usually, I don't know, they might take 25% or something from the distribution platform or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely worth it to have it on every platform for people to view it.
So you don't choose which platforms with them. They just do all of them.
I don't know. Maybe you can turn on and off which platforms it goes on.
Some concepts you can. I use Lambda, but problem with Lambda is hard to find when my songs are.
Oh yeah.
Like, see, I know like I pushed it to Spotify or YouTube, right? But when I go search for I'm not able to find it. So they don't send me proper links to the song.
All right. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's Proton too, right?
Proton does make you like a
Pre-save link,
yeah.
all release info on one page.
Yeah.
What's that?
Proton will send you like a thing, like it's like a pre-save and pre-sale link, and it'll have a bit more Spotify.
Do they send that to the label, or do they send that?
Probably to the label.
Yeah, well the labels always send that to me, so.
I've not seen that.
But I know Mark always sends it to me. He goes, "Oh, here's the pre-sale link.
Yeah.
Keep it close until this date." Whatever.
Yeah.
What about those YouTube aggregators who like make playlists?
Oh, that's I've heard that that's meant to be really good. To be trying to get into playlists and stuff like that. So it's like a lot of people listen. So a really good way of marketing your music is trying to get your music on popular playlists. Because then you're like, yeah, people who listen to those playlists find your music. And you could do that either by some of these playlists, you can just give them money to include your song into there. Or the kind of organic way would be to try and find people who run these Spotify playlists and just keep sending them your music. And if they like it, maybe they'll add it. But I think really how it works is mainly you pay money and they put you into the popular.
Find their account.
There's websites and stuff for it.
Because they have information and they send me songs.
Oh yeah.
But on Spotify, I think there are like come across one.
I've never really done that, just because I don't know if that will reach the audience that I'm going for. But like on SoundCloud, you might see people do like premieres, like 8 Day Montreal does premieres of techno songs and stuff like that. And that's basically same sitcho, like you pay them some money and they upload the track to their SoundCloud as a premiere. And I've done that a little bit because there are some like quite specific,
There's some good success stories with that. Like Darcy has done a few on like 8 Day, and he got like a couple hundred followers from
Yeah.
really took off.
Yeah.
Got like 3,000 plays and stuff.
So I think when it comes to playlists and stuff like that, what you want to do is, if this is a playlist that you already listen to and you like the music in there and you think it is like close to what you're making, well, now this is a very good marketing opportunity, you know? But like making like Australian bush prog, like of everyone I know that listens to bush prog, and I haven't really asked this recently, but you should ask people who are into the same music as you, where do you find new music? And if they say, like, when I ask people that, they say Spotify radio and Spotify algorithms. So as in, they make their own playlist and Spotify just starts to recommend them stuff. So me getting my song in some popular playlist may not help as much as just trying to associate myself with other artists through like collaboration or compilation albums. Like in the underground scene, like a really big thing is these compilation albums where an album will get released and it'll be like one song from each artist. And I did that a lot of that, like just releasing basically singles on albums, but on that album are a lot of other artists that would have similar followings to me. And so I'm associating my music closely with music that's similar to mine.
Do you push that, or does the label sort of decide that when you're sending the specific tracking, if they're compiling a compilation?
Yeah.
Anything that fits, and they tell you? Or would you go, maybe if you've got UTR, would you have people come to you saying,
Yeah.
that didn't fit on these specific compilations?
So, let's speak from Universal Tribe point of view. So I compile subspecies for that. Basically, when I'm looking to do subspecies, I'll think of who I want to be like the headliners, or like who are artists that I really want on it. And I'll email them and I'll send them the previous albums and be like, have a listen to this. Like, I'd really like to have you on. And yeah, like those people I'll approach. But then of course I announce it publicly and I let people submit songs as well. And with Universal Tribe as a whole, because we have like a few different VAs, basically what we do is people just send us music and then we'll sort it into which VA we think it might work in. Or if people message me directly with a track for subspecies, I'll just listen to it and see if it fits the vibe basically. And if it fits the vibe, then it will go into the like, we'll consider it. And then the next kind of step of whether or not I'll take it is whether or not the production quality is high enough that I think that the finished product will be DJable. You know, does it fit these sorts of things? Like, does it have, is the balance right? Is the mix good? Is it, you know, is the low end clean? That sort of thing. Because, and then usually I try and give some good feedback when I'm knocking tracks back as well. If someone has the right vibe, but just their production's not up to scratch, that's when I'll usually put feedback in. Whereas if they send me like an Afro house track, I'll just be like, I'll just send them the links to the VA and I'll be like, listen to these, try again, sort of thing. Because
Do you get many submissions?
yeah, like we're getting more, but yeah, I think maybe 15 or something. If we increase, if I include tracks that like are just blatantly they didn't even listen to the previous albums, maybe 20 to 25. But that's just like the hustler, and I respect the hustler who's like, I've got a song and I'm going to send this song to every single label and one of them will take it. And like, even if it's yeah, even if it's nowhere near even in the same genre, don't do that. But find the labels that represent your sound and like keep sending them music, because people who are choosing these tracks, like even if you send them one track and it's not very good and you know basically you're just not ready yet, they're not gonna not listen to your next one again, because it's like, one thing especially is like, we'll get sent a track, and as long as the vibe's nearly there, we understand that people improve. And if we get another track from someone 6 months later and it's better, it still might not be there yet, but now we're like, oh, let's actually watch this guy, because we're still gonna reject him, but he's getting better. And next time he sends a track back, we'll actually look at it quicker, because we'll be like, well, maybe it's going to be like, maybe it's there, and we'll start giving more feedback and stuff like that. So I don't think that, I know a lot of people get really scared about sending music in and be like, oh, I'm just not ready yet, and I want to make a really good first impression. And I think first impressions count for something, but also improving counts for a lot. And like, when I see someone improve, that makes me more excited than someone who's just like, oh yeah, they're pretty good, but then the next track is also pretty good, and it's like, oh, maybe they'll never go to here. But if I see here, then I'm like, all right, let's really watch this guy, because he's actually they're actually working really hard to improve, rather than like plateauing or something like that. Yeah.
Where do we submit a track to?
Like, where would you find the email address or something to? Yeah, generally it's over email. I would recommend sending WAV files that you've uploaded to like Google Drive instead of sending a SoundCloud link. It's just a bit more professional and higher quality, although SoundCloud link is good. Actually, I would like if someone sent me both, that would make me really happy, because then it means that I can quickly hear it on SoundCloud and I don't have to download it. Because if it's just a Google Drive link, I'm probably going to go like, all right, I'm going to put that into the list of things to do when I'm doing it. But if it's SoundCloud link, I'll be like, all right, I'll be able to tell you in 10 seconds if it's got a chance. And I'm like, all right, oh, cool. Oh, I'm interested now, But I would kind of want to listen. I would want to be able to download it to analyze it properly.
So Dave,
Yo.
you could pick up to 5 plugins.
Yeah.
Every beginner must have plugins for mixing, mastering.
Yeah.
Like what order? Yeah, up to 5 if you could only have them and the internet goes down forever.
Yeah.
Can't download anymore.
Honestly, like, probably like, if I had to pick a bundle, it would have to be the Fab Filter suite. But definitely Saturn.
I noticed you didn't use that.
Yeah, I didn't use it on my analog chain. But if I was doing a digital chain, it would definitely be in there. But I use Saturn when mixing heaps, especially in like processing things. Why Saturn? It's just got really clean multi-band saturation. So that means that if I want to just bring out the mids a bit, I can do that. And we saw with the Raw how much loudness we can get by just a bit of subtle saturation in the mids and highs. So having something like Saturn that's really clean to do that, like, yeah, I would need something like that, I think, if I was like,
In Saturn, you can turn the bass off, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I also would say Fab Filter Pro and B. This is the same as multiband dynamics, but in Ableton, but you can have as many bands as you want. And usually when it comes to mastering, having only 3 bands is just not enough. Like having 5 could be good. So being able to make as many bands of compression as you want as possible helps really good. I haven't actually completely made up my mind on my favorite limiter, so it'd be hard to 100% say what VST limiter I'd use, but like a Fab Filter L2 or Waves L2, these probably FabFilter L2 has more options because it's got like 5 or 6 different color settings, whereas the Waves L2 just has one color setting, I think, but it just sounds good. So sometimes something that just sounds good might be better than having a lot more options. But I think that the Ableton limiter doesn't sound good. And if that's at the very end of your mastering chain and that's the thing that's squashing it, you really want something nice for that limiter at the end. And I don't think that the Ableton limiter really cuts it for that. So some sort of limiter would be a good investment at some point, having some sort of high quality limiter. And then for mastering, we want some sort of stereo field control and analyzer. Control / and I think Ozone, what do they call there? Imager. Yeah. That Ozone Imager is dope for that. And so what that looks like. Surely not.
They sent out an email for one, like it's a 24-hour thing.
Yeah, I got it.
This is so this is the Waves one. So it's obviously no. I guess my Ozone's the other thing that on this computer hasn't loaded properly. Oh, isotope. Wider is good for single channel stuff. It works really well and it's free. It's really great for that. But for like overall imaging, I think Ozone Image is really nice because it shows you how wide your track is, and then it also gives you the option to boost certain bands of frequencies and making them higher. So you'll notice that like a common theme here of VSTs that I'm recommending that Ableton stuff can't do is everything multi-band, because then you can really narrow in on certain bands. But like really it's the multi-band saturation and the multi-band stereo stuff and a really nice sounding limiter. I think those are the 3 things that really it's hard to do in Ableton that like external VSTs do. Just in terms of can't live without plugins, I would add Shaperbox 3 in there. That's a multi-band volume shaper. And that's what I use for side chains. Again, multi-band, so you can have the lows side chaining differently to the mid side chaining differently to the highs, which just means that you can get more control in there. Stereo, limiting, saturation, multi-band. Like there's a lot of things that and then I guess it's a bit of a overkill, but something like Omnisphere / Contact, which is not for mixing and mastering at all, but if it was VSTs that I'd have to use, like that I couldn't make my music without, I would say one of these, either Contact or Omnisphere. I wouldn't be able to achieve my sound without one of those, because these are how I create realistic instrument sounds. So be that realistic drum kits all the way up to, various sort of worldly instruments. Like, I could have anything from a guitar to like a Middle Eastern saz to like, a flute to violin, all of those instruments that I don't know how to play. And you can't synthesize a sound like that because it sounds crap. Like these instruments, Omnisphere and Contact, actually have that instrument sampled at different volumes for every single note. So depending on how much velocity you have in the MIDI, it's actually playing a different sample. So like a real instrument, like a guitar, for example, when you pluck the string harder, it doesn't just get louder. You actually get different tones. It starts sounding kind of muted, and then when you start to really hit the string, it's like bang, bang, like it's got that twang to it. You can only achieve that effect if you've actually recorded the string being plucked at different volumes for different notes. And that's the only way to really achieve like a realistic instrument sound without recording it. So
In your track on the latest compilation.
yeah, that's Omnisphere. Yeah. The Egyptian Saz B, I think, is the patch for that one.
Very cool.
Oh, but the guitar in that track
Yeah.
is recorded. Yeah, that's just... Yeah.
It sounds recorded.
Yeah. But you...
That's really good.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, the guitar's just a electric guitar, just DI'd straight in and then processed in Ableton. But the instrument that it's talking to is Omnisphere.
Oh, hang on. So, MIDIing. You're MIDIing the.
So
He's doing both, is he?
Did you actually record the guitar or are you playing VST?
it's just a straight recording of the guitar, yeah.
So, Omnisphere is.
The other sound?
Yeah. Yeah, gotcha.
So that's the guitar. But that's the saz. Like, bling. And like... That instrument's the saz. That's guitar there. Pardon? Yeah. It's just yeah. I'm not don't have the kind of the chops that I used to have, so it's just a matter of like recording the same thing over and over and over and over again, and then still chopping it up and warping it and like getting it to work. But yeah, that like whenever like definitely in like the Sayonara and Cooney tracks, a lot of the stringed instruments in that is saz, and it's just something that just cuts through really nicely. SAZ. Any other questions? Anything you think I've missed, Chris?